In the sunny city of Manila, while the frenetic routine followed its course through the congested streets of the Philippine capital, Manny Pacquiao was reviewing his correspondence in his office. It was a morning like any other for the legendary boxer and senator, with an agenda full of political and social commitments that had accumulated since his election to the Philippine Senate. Among official letters, event invitations, and government documents, a simple handwritten letter on lined paper caught his attention by contrasting with the formality of the others. The envelope had no stamps or official markings, only a stamp from the juvenile penitentiary system of Cebu, a city a few hours from Manila. While his assistants organized important documents and phone calls, something about the worn envelope made Manny open it first, setting aside seemingly more urgent matters. The irregular and somewhat childish handwriting immediately contrasted with the formal documents that usually passed through his hands. As he unfolded the crumpled pages, Manny's eyes scanned the lines written by a boy named Danilo Reyes, a young man of only 17 years who was serving time for a crime that, according to him, he had not committed. The young man's words didn't ask for money or gifts, as many fan letters typically requested. The youth merely expressed his admiration for the champion, telling how Manny's fights were the only moments of hope that the young inmates had, when they all gathered to watch the national hero transform impossibles into possibles. What touched the boxer's heart most was the end of the letter, where Danilo told about his dream of one day being able to train professionally in boxing, not to become famous or rich, but to show the youth of his poor community that there were alternatives beyond crime. The boy related how he had organized small training sessions in the prison yard, using techniques he observed in Pacquiao's fights, helping other young people channel their anger and frustration through sport, even without any proper equipment. At that moment, while the city pulsed outside and his phone wouldn't stop ringing with important calls, Manny felt something change inside him. It wasn't just another request for help or a letter from a fan. It was a reflection of his own story, a distant mirror of his youth in the poor streets of General Santos City, when boxing had been his only way out of extreme poverty. With the letter still in his hands, he did something that surprised his advisors. He cancelled all appointments for the day and asked them to immediately investigate everything about Danilo Reyes and the case that had led him to juvenile detention. The following days were ones of intense investigation, with Manny discreetly mobilizing a team of lawyers and private investigators to look into Danilo's case. The initial reports confirmed the boy's version. The son of a washerwoman and a fisherman who had died in a sea accident, Danilo had been imprisoned 8 months ago, accused of participating in a robbery of a convenience store in the neighborhood where he lived. The evidence was circumstantial. Danilo had been seen near the location shortly before the crime, wore a shirt similar to that described by witnesses, and had no consistent alibi, as he was alone returning from an improvised boxing training in an abandoned lot. The legal team hired by Pacquiao discovered serious flaws in the police investigation. The real robber, as suggested by witnesses not heard in the trial, would be the son of a local politician, protected by his father's influence. The case had been conducted hastily, with an overworked public defender who barely had time to talk with Danilo before the trial. The boy, without resources or knowledge of the judicial system, ended up sentenced to 3 years in a juvenile detention center, where he survived with dignity, despite the harsh conditions. As the investigation progressed, Manny kept himself informed about every detail, feeling increasingly that there was something deeply unjust about the situation. The photos sent by the investigators showed a thin young man with a determined look who, despite the hostile environment, maintained a respectful posture with the guards and helped other inmates. The institution's reports confirmed what Danilo had written. He really did organize small boxing training sessions in the yard, using improvised techniques and bags made of old clothes filled with sand. What impressed Manny most were the testimonies of the detention center staff, who described how Danilo's initiative had significantly reduced fights among the young inmates. Several adolescents who were constantly involved in conflicts before now channeled their energy into the improvised training. One of the guards even mentioned that Danilo frequently talked about Pacquiao, telling the other boys how the boxer had overcome extreme poverty through sport and discipline, transforming not only his own life but returning to his origins to help needy communities. After 2 weeks of confidential investigation, Manny had in his hands a complete report that not only strongly suggested Danilo's innocence, but also revealed a pattern of corruption and negligence in the local judicial system. That night, alone in his office, away from the spotlights and cameras that constantly followed him, the world boxing champion made a decision that would surprise everyone. He would not only fight for Danilo's freedom, but would do something that would forever change the young man's life and the lives of many others in the same conditions. Wednesday morning dawned with the Cebu Juvenile Detention Center in an uproar, with rumors that an important figure would be visiting the institution. The young inmates were instructed to organize the yard and common areas, without knowing who would come. Danilo, as usual, was helping with the organization, leading a group of boys in cleaning the space where they conducted improvised boxing training. The atmosphere was one of curiosity and expectation, with theories emerging at every moment among the teenagers about who the mysterious visitor might be. When 3 black SUVs entered through the gates of the institution, followed by 2 vans with television network logos, the buzz increased. Danilo and the other boys were called to the central yard, where official ceremonies normally took place. The young man's heart almost stopped when he saw, descending from the first vehicle, the unmistakable figure of Manny Pacquiao, accompanied by his team and a group of lawyers. He couldn't believe that his letter, sent without much hope, had really reached his idol. The visit, however, was not just a gesture of charity or an opportunity for photos. Before the TV cameras that broadcast live to the entire country, Manny announced that, after thorough investigation, he had discovered serious irregularities in Danilo Reyes' case and was formally presenting a request for criminal review, accompanied by new evidence and witnesses. At his side, one of the most respected human rights lawyers in the Philippines explained the legal details, while Manny observed the emotional reaction of Danilo, who watched everything without fully understanding what was happening. But the visit held even more surprises. After the formal announcement about the review process, Manny went to the center of the yard, where Danilo and other young people used to practice boxing without any proper equipment. There, before all the cameras, the senator and world champion announced the creation of the Pacquiao Reintegration Through Sport program, an initiative that would officially implement boxing training and other sports in juvenile detention centers throughout the country, starting with Cebu, with investment in equipment, qualified teachers, and even the construction of a proper gymnasium within the institution. The most emotional moment, however, was when Manny asked to see how Danilo conducted his improvised training. Before everyone, the boy, initially shy but gaining confidence with each moment, demonstrated the exercises he had created based on videos of Pacquiao's fights. The naturalness with which the young man led the other inmates, correcting postures and encouraging with gestures and words of support, impressed not only Manny but everyone present. At the end of the demonstration, Pacquiao approached Danilo, put his hands on his shoulders, and made an announcement that no one expected. Regardless of the outcome of the criminal review, he would personally ensure that the young man received professional boxing training, as he recognized in him not only technical talent but a natural capacity for leadership and teaching that could not be wasted. The days that followed Manny Pacquiao's visit completely transformed the routine of the detention center. The Philippine media, always eager for stories involving the national idol, dedicated extensive coverage to Danilo's case and the boxer's initiative. Investigative journalists, inspired by Pacquiao's action, began to unearth other similar cases of possible injustices in the juvenile judicial system, creating a national debate about necessary reforms. Meanwhile, at the detention center, new boxing equipment began to arrive. Professional gloves, punching bags, protective gear, a dismountable ring, and proper uniforms, all personally selected by Pacquiao and his technical team. The psychological impact on the children and adolescents at the center was immediate and profound. Young people who previously showed apathy or rebellion now lined up to participate in the training organized by Danilo, who had been officially designated as an assistant in the sports program, under the supervision of professional trainers who visited the place 3 times a week. The discipline required by boxing, with rigid schedules, controlled diet, and consistent exercises, began to reflect positively in other areas of the institution, with improvement in general behavior, reduction of conflicts, and even greater engagement in educational activities. Meanwhile, away from the spotlight, the legal team hired by Manny was working intensely on Danilo's case. New witnesses were found, including an employee of the store that had been robbed, who admitted to having been pressured to identify Danilo instead of the real culprit. A security camera from a nearby establishment, whose images had not been requested in the original investigation, clearly showed that the robber had a completely different physical constitution from Danilo's, as well as a visible tattoo on his arm, a detail that the young man did not possess. The public pressure, fueled by constant media coverage, began to have an effect on local authorities. The judge responsible for the case, initially reluctant to admit possible flaws in the process, ended up yielding in the face of new evidence and growing national attention to the case. After a preliminary hearing, where the new evidence was presented, the magistrate determined the provisional release of Danilo, while the review process followed its legal procedures. The decision, announced on a rainy Friday afternoon, caught everyone by surprise due to the unusual speed in the Philippine judicial system. Manny Pacquiao, who was in Manila for an important session in the Senate, received the news during a meeting. Without thinking twice, he cancelled his subsequent commitments and boarded the first available flight to Cebu. He wanted to be personally present when Danilo crossed the gates of the institution as a free man, even if provisionally. He knew that the moment would represent not only an individual victory for the boy but a powerful symbol for all wronged young people in the Philippines. A symbol that, sometimes, justice was possible, even for the poorest and most vulnerable. Danilo's release occurred under strong public commotion. Dozens of journalists and a small crowd gathered at the gates of the detention center, all wanting to witness the moment when the young man would leave the place accompanied by the national idol. Danilo's mother, a lady of fragile appearance and prematurely aged by life's difficulties, cried silently beside Manny, who gently held her arm to give her support. It was the first time that Danilo had personally met the man who had changed the destiny of her family, and words failed her in the face of the gratitude she felt. When Danilo finally appeared at the main gate, wearing simple clothes donated by Pacquiao's program, the expression on his face was a complex mixture of emotions: relief, disbelief, gratitude, and a renewed determination. His eyes quickly found his mother's and then Manny's. In that brief moment of exchanged glances, a deep connection was established between the young man and the champion, a mutual understanding that transcended words. Both knew the pain of extreme poverty, the feeling of social invisibility, and the transformative power of a genuine opportunity. The first stop after the release was not the small house where Danilo lived with his mother, as many expected. Instead, Manny surprised everyone by announcing that he would take the boy and Danilo to see the professional gym where he himself trained when he was in Cebu. On the way, protected from curious looks inside the SUV with dark windows, the boxer explained his plan. While the criminal review process continued to definitively prove Danilo's innocence, he wanted the young man to immediately begin his professional training, not only as an athlete but also qualifying as a certified trainer. The arrival at the luxurious sports complex had a visible impact on Danilo and his mother. They had never been in such a modern and well-equipped place. Manny personally conducted a tour of the facilities, introducing Danilo to the trainers and other athletes as a young talent with the potential to transform lives. The way Pacquiao treated the boy, not as a charity case, but as an equal, someone with his own value and ability to contribute, made a deep impression on all present, especially on the other boxers who trained at the location, many of them national and international champions. The most significant moment of that day, however, happened when Manny took Danilo and his mother to a small conference room on the second floor of the complex. There, in the presence of lawyers, representatives of the Pacquiao Foundation, and selected journalists, the champion officially announced that Danilo would be the first beneficiary of a new scholarship and sports training program for young people in vulnerable situations. The scholarship would cover not only technical training in boxing, but would also ensure that Danilo could complete his formal education and, if he wished, enter university. Additionally, Danilo would receive support to find a better job, and the family would be relocated to a more dignified house near the training center. All of this, Manny firmly explained before the cameras, was not charity. It was an investment in the future of the Philippines through talented young people who, without an opportunity, could be lost in the system. The following months were ones of intense transformation for Danilo. Following a rigorous routine that combined professional boxing training in the morning, classes to complete high school in the afternoon, and technical sports training courses on weekends, the young man showed a determination that impressed even the most experienced trainers on Pacquiao's team. His thin body, somewhat weakened by detention, gradually gained muscle definition and strength, while his technique, which was already surprisingly good for someone without formal training, was refined with each session. Even more remarkable was his natural ability to teach. In the moments when he assisted with the training of needy children in the gym's social program, Danilo demonstrated a rare patience and pedagogical skill. Meanwhile, the legal case was advancing at a rapid pace, propelled by media visibility and the resources invested by Pacquiao's team. New witnesses emerged, including a former employee of the local police who, pressured by the evidence, ended up confessing that there had been manipulation in the original investigation to protect the real culprit. The confession, widely disseminated by the main communication vehicles of the country, caused national commotion and raised questions about how many other Danilos would be unjustly imprisoned by the same corrupted system. Dona Lourdes' life was also undergoing significant changes. With the support of the Pacquiao Foundation, she had left the exhausting work as a washerwoman and now coordinated the laundry service of the sports complex, a job with a formal contract, social benefits, and a salary she had never dreamed of receiving. The family's new house, modest but comfortable and located in a safe neighborhood near the training center, represented a social ascension that seemed impossible just a few months before. In the rare moments when she wasn't working, Dona Lourdes attended adult literacy classes, determined to accompany her son's educational growth. The impact of Danilo's case, however, transcended his own story and that of his family. Inspired by Pacquiao's initiative, other Filipino athletes and celebrities began to develop similar programs in different regions of the country. The juvenile judicial system, pressured by public scrutiny, initiated a review of protocols and processes, with special emphasis on cases involving low-income youth. At the Cebu Detention Center, the boxing program implemented by Manny had expanded to include other sports modalities, and the rates of internal violence and criminal recidivism had dropped dramatically in the first 6 months of operation. On a Sunday afternoon, while resting after a particularly intense training session, Danilo received a surprise visit from Manny in his locker room. The champion, who was in the city for political commitments, wanted to personally communicate 2 important pieces of news. First, the Superior Court had finally set the date for the final judgment of the criminal review process, with strong indications that Danilo's innocence would be officially recognized. Second, and perhaps even more impactful, Manny had registered Danilo in an important national youth boxing competition that would happen the following month in Manila. It was the opportunity the young man had been waiting for to prove his worth in the ring, not only for himself but for all the boys at the detention center who now saw him as a symbol of hope and the possibility of redemption. The National Youth Boxing Competition attracted young talents from all provinces of the Philippines to the modern gymnasium in Manila. Among them, Danilo stood out not only for his story widely disseminated by the media, but also for the constant presence of cameras that documented every step of his journey, part of a documentary that the national television network was producing about his life. The pressure on his shoulders was immense. He carried not only his own hopes, but also the expectations of all the young people from the rehabilitation program that Manny had created, as well as the responsibility of justifying the confidence that the world champion had placed in him. His first fight was against an experienced boxer from Davao, with more than 15 amateur fights on his resume. In the initial seconds, Danilo's tension and inexperience in official competitions were evident, with somewhat rigid and defensive movements. However, as the first round progressed, something changed in his posture, as if the memories of all the adversities faced in recent years transformed into strength and determination. His punches gained precision, his movement became more fluid, and, to the surprise of the audience and commentators, the young man who less than a year ago improvised training in a prison yard won his first official combat by unanimous decision of the judges. Danilo's trajectory in the competition was marked by an impressive evolution in each fight. From the first timid victory to the convincing performance in the quarterfinals, where he knocked out a favored opponent in the second round, the young man demonstrated not only natural talent but an extraordinary ability to learn and adapt quickly. In the stands, Danilo nervously watched each combat, accompanied by a growing group of supporters, from employees of the Pacquiao Foundation to former detainees of the rehabilitation program who had obtained freedom and now worked or studied thanks to the initiative inspired by Danilo's story. The semi-final, broadcast live to the entire country, coincided with an equally significant event. That same morning, the Superior Court had finally issued its decision on Danilo's case, officially recognizing his innocence and determining not only the complete annulment of his conviction, but also compensation for moral damages and the opening of an investigation against those responsible for the manipulation of the original process. The news, announced on the big screens of the gymnasium minutes before his fight, was received with a deafening ovation from the audience present. Danilo, emotional but focused, transformed the emotional charge of that moment into an extraordinary performance, securing his spot in the final with an unquestionable victory. The grand final of the competition, scheduled for a Sunday afternoon, became a national event. Manny Pacquiao, who was at a training camp in the United States preparing for his next international fight, surprised everyone by returning to the Philippines, especially to be present. Seated at the edge of the ring, next to Danilo, the world champion watched with visible pride as Danilo faced the current national youth champion, an athlete 2 years older and with a much more extensive resume. The combat was intense and balanced, with both boxers demonstrating refined technique and fierce determination. After 5 rounds of a battle that kept spectators in constant suspense, when the referee raised the winner's arm, it was not Danilo's arm. The young man had lost by split decision of the judges, in a controversial result that generated heated debates among commentators and specialists. Danilo's reaction to the defeat revealed much about the man he had become in recent months. Instead of contesting the result or seeking excuses, the young man respectfully congratulated his opponent, thanked the judges, and, before the cameras that broadcast live, declared that that defeat was just the beginning of his journey, not the end. The maturity and sportsmanship demonstrated at that difficult moment won the respect not only of the audience present but of important figures in national sport who were watching the competition. Behind the scenes, away from the spotlights, Manny embraced the young man for a long time, whispering words of encouragement that, later, Danilo would describe as the most important moment of that entire experience. In the days that followed the competition, while the media still echoed the inspiring story of the former detainee who had reached the national final in his first competition, a succession of extraordinary events began to unfold. First, the opponent who had defeated Danilo in the final, impressed with his technique and story, invited him to train at his academy in Baguio, known for forming various national champions. Then, 3 prestigious universities in the Philippines offered complete scholarships to Danilo, interested not only in his potential as an athlete but also in his leadership capacity and the positive visibility that his story brought. The most significant impact, however, came 2 weeks after the competition, when Manny Pacquiao announced, during a press conference in Manila, the national expansion of the rehabilitation through sport program, with the construction of training centers attached to juvenile detention institutions in all the main cities of the country. Most surprising was the announcement that Danilo would be named deputy coordinator of the program, combining his professional training as an athlete with an administrative role that would allow him to directly influence youth rehabilitation policies in the Philippines. The appointment, unprecedented for someone so young and recently out of the system, generated heated debates in the political and social circles of the country. While some criticized the decision as premature or motivated by publicity, the vast majority of the population enthusiastically supported the initiative, seeing in Danilo's trajectory a powerful symbol of transformation and second chance. In his first official interview as deputy coordinator, the young man demonstrated a surprisingly mature and comprehensive vision, emphasizing the need to combine sports training with formal education, psychological support, and preparation for the job market. His personal experience, he argued, allowed him to understand the real needs of young people in the system in a way that traditional administrators could not. 1 year after receiving the letter that had started that entire journey, Manny Pacquiao and Danilo Reyes together inaugurated the first integrated center for sport and education for socially vulnerable youth, built in the same poor neighborhood where Danilo had grown up. The complex, partially financed by Pacquiao's foundation and partially by donations from companies and ordinary citizens inspired by the story, included not only high-quality sports facilities but also classrooms, computer labs, a library, and a professional training center. At the inauguration ceremony, broadcast to the entire country, dozens of young people who had passed through the rehabilitation program were present, now reintegrated into society as students, athletes, or workers. At the end of the event, as the authorities and celebrities dispersed, Manny and Danilo remained for a moment alone in the new boxing ring that occupied the center of the complex. There, away from the cameras and microphones, the world champion took from his bag an object that he had carefully kept. The original letter, already somewhat worn from the many times it had been read and reread throughout that extraordinary year. Returning it to the young man who had written it in a moment of despair and hope, Manny reminded Danilo that great transformations often begin with small acts of courage, like writing a letter without knowing if it will reach its destination, or believing in the potential of a young man when everyone else had already discarded him. In that silent moment of mutual understanding, both recognized that their lives had been profoundly transformed not only by boxing or fame, but by the fundamental confidence in the human capacity to change and to help others change. If you like this kind of story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on the next videos.